Hello, Pavi, and welcome to the second part of what we started last time, which is the topic of self-love and self-care, basically. And last time we talked about the fundamentals of the topic, or rather, I have to say, I guess I steered in that direction. Because for me, it's always important when we look at a problem just doesn't exist in itself. Most of the problems are a result of some sort of misconception. So when we want to solve something, it's important to look at, am I actually sure about what I want to solve? Is there clarity of the structure of the problem? Or do I just react to what seems to be missing there? And if we do, then we might be in a trap. So for example, when teenagers think, oh, I want to look better, right? Is that the actual issue, that I'm not looking good enough? No, the issue is that teenagers, when they come to this age, they start to become really insecure because they leave the logic of the household where there is more or less acceptance, and they enter a logic of the society of peers, which is relatively new. They become terribly sensitive to that. And then every feature that they have becomes a source of a possible insecurity. I'm not smart enough, I'm not beautiful enough. So the proper framework of the problem is to see that as well, and not just to follow the teenagers like, okay, where's the best surgeon to make your nose smaller and your boobs bigger and whatever they desire. So this would be a wrong approach. So this is why, for me, it's important when we look at issues to look at the aspects around them, to look at the fundamentals and see if part of the issue can be already solved or dissolved when we look at the framework. So this is why it was important to me to look at those fundamentals. And I hope to have made clear that part of the issue might be based on a misconception of what self-love actually is. And that we might have a projection of what self-love is, but that it's not more than a romantic idea in many cases, and more an expression of the symptom, that something is lacking than than just the lack of a certain technique. Most people would not be satisfied with that on a long-term basis. Nevertheless, I vowed to be more practical today.
Alrighty.
But you already said that you still have some questions from last time, so let's start with that.
Yeah. So, Doc, yeah, I listened to our conversation again and sort of thought through it, and I had a couple questions about the entire self-love, self-acceptance theory, and I think the question keeps coming back to happiness, right? Like that's all you kind of chase in life. And it was funny because I was listening to Sadhguru, and he was like, well, when you're happy in life, everything is going well. When you're traveling or things are going well, you don't come and start thinking, oh, do I love myself? Oh, what's the purpose of life?
Right.
And all of that. And then I was wondering, is all of this just comes down to just finding the things that make you happy? Like, the framework that you mentioned last week was, start to identify, let's say you like traveling, start to identify what is it that you like, inculcate that more in your day-to-day life, or that feeling more in your day-to-day life, observe that and grow that. And it may be different for different people, but it sort of came down to, just inculcating the things that bring you happiness and joy into your day-to-day life. And that is self-love or self-acceptance. Am I right in thinking that's what you were talking about last week or the last episode?
Yes, I think it goes very much in that direction. Now, of course, the issue is what is happiness and what brings me happiness. So that, of course, is no simple thing in itself as well. But basically, yes, if someone is satisfied, they don't have those luxury. They don't ask those luxury questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be?
Yeah.
Am I caring enough of myself? Am I loving myself? Those questions would typically not occur to someone who is satisfied unless they're very philosophically oriented and they would like to, they just would like to tackle these kinds of questions on a more principled level, but it's not in order to fill a gap that they have, or fill a hole that they have.
And that again, sort of like, that was what I thought I was doing, right? Like, I started to, in my late 20s, early 30s, I started to say, okay, I like work, but I'm going to give my example of, I love working, but I don't like the politics. So let me stay more on the startup company side. So because corporates have a lot more politics, startups have less, let me go there. I love traveling, and I really just love, going to new places. So we need to, just like travel more, do more history. I would read a lot more historical books, and all of that was going very well for a while. And granted, there were, issues, right? At work, you had some issues and all of that. But overall, like I had to say, like, I was 8 out of 10, my life was happy. And there were certain elements of my life that I was working on. I was still coming to you at that time, talking about, improving myself.
Yes.
But then reality hit, right? And when I say reality hit, my husband had a medical condition, and all the things that used to bring me joy, that we were doing, that used to bring me this happiness and peace and all of that, which were traveling, which was learning, which was being in Europe, and all of them went out the window. We had to move back to New York, and sort of like, focus more on his health. I had to go back and like find like a little bit more of a traditional job, and so then it just like, so what should a person do in terms of this whole self-love, self-acceptance, happiness thing when somebody has like an issue or a problem in life, right? Someone's mother got cancer or some other problem in life, and like really just reality hits in some form or another.
Yes.
So where does the self-love go?
Well, if we stick to that, what we just said, right, that maybe the topic of self-love is another problem in disguise, which is the lack of joy or happiness. Or let's include another aspect of it, is richness of life. So because, as you pointed out, when bad things happen, then it's kind of out of place to speak about happiness and joy, because it's not the time and place for that. But I can still have a richness in my life, right? I can have a fulfilling way of mourning. I can have a fulfilling way of accompanying someone who has a medical condition or who is old and aging. I can do it in a very superficial way, or I can do it with a richness, with a fullness, right?
Right.
So that would be maybe an adjective that is more fitting to these kinds of contexts. One of the challenges that we have when we face these kinds of questions, what can I do to make my life happy, joyful, satisfied, rich, is that we are always trying to catch up. We are never in control of the situation. We always perceive what the unconscious is doing with us, and then we're trying to find an adequate life or adequate actions in order to match the need that has now came up. It's kind of, it would be the easiest case if the unconscious would be structured in one way and one way only. So once we found out how to satisfy those needs with travel, with a certain kind of work, with playing guitar or something, then I would just have to keep doing that and everything would be fine, right? But then it can be a certain occurrence. It can be a certain life event, moving back to the US, or someone is getting sick, but it doesn't have to be. For many people, life just goes on, and they feel that by continuing to do what they have always been doing, their life becomes more and more empty and shallow. And they don't even know why. Nothing specific happened.
Right.
So they have a similar question that they have to catch up with themselves. They have to catch up with what their unconscious is producing as a new status quo. And they have to start anew. They have to reassess anew. And the people who are the most fortunate are the ones that are organically changing and not really holding on to the winning formula of the past. So it was always a great joy to play tennis, and I made it to a certain skill set. Now I can compete with the best people in my town or neighborhood, right? So there's some attachment to it. It becomes part of my personality. Now my unconscious changes, or to be more precise, it changes kind of the needs that it demands from me. And the people who are most fortunate who don't even blink an eye, they're like, okay, that was the tennis time. Away with that. I don't need it anymore. So if I like those people, then let me continue to see them outside of this context for drinks or conversations or walks, but I'm done with the tennis. And they don't even mourn, 1 second about it. Most people are not like this. Most
I would
people,
say about 90% are not like this. Like
yes,
most of us will be like, well, that part did give me joy, so let me try and like change it up a bit, right?
yes,
So,
right. Or to use a metaphor that is sometimes used in business, there is this image of the mouse that wants cheese.
mm-hmm.
And so to narrate it, it's quite instructive actually. So it's obviously it's just a parable, but the idea is that when we conduct experiments with mice and we
Mm-hmm.
put them into a maze, and there are three gates, and behind one of them is cheese, what we do is they explore, right? Eventually they find the cheese. We remove the mouse, put again another piece of cheese at the same place. The mouse pretty quickly will learn to go the quickest way to the cheese because this is what it wants. Then we
Yeah.
put the cheese to another place, not behind gate 1, but behind gate 3. The mouse goes to gate 1, looks a little bit surprised, sniffs around, and then continues to search for another place and eventually find the cheese. And now in this parable, we do the same with humans.
Mm-hmm.
And when they have learned that the cheese is behind gate 1 and we remove it, the human goes back again and again and again to gate 1. Because like, it was here, it must be here, it must be somewhere here, right?
Yeah. I'm just
And
not looking hard enough.
well, no, I'm not willing
Yeah.
to forget that what has worked in the past for me might have
Yeah.
changed. I'm super
Yeah.
stubborn about it. And kind of the end of the parable, or the morale is, the mouse wants cheese and humans want to be right.
That's funny. And right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not facing reality so much, but I insist that what has worked for me in the past must be somewhere here. So maybe I just need to change my tennis coach. Maybe I have to move from sand to grass. There must be,
Yeah.
like, it must be some small tweak there, right? Because it must be the tennis
Mm-hmm.
thing. So you see my metaphor there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly a good trait when one is so much in tune with oneself and with one's unconscious, when one realizes that the time for something is over and we don't blink an eye, and rather the unconscious ideally co-produces an idea, an inkling of not only what the next need or desire is, but also how to get it. And then I immediately gravitate towards the new thing. That would be the ideal thing. What we certainly can do is to learn to let go of the topics of the past.
Mm-hmm.
This is one component. Okay, but I digressed, I think. What was your question?
Yeah. And my question was, and I see what you're saying, right? Like we keep going back to, the things in the past, um, to find joy and say, okay, maybe something I myself must have done something wrong that it's not
Yes.
bringing me joy anymore. Um, my question was more about, let's, like, taking your example of last week, you try all of this, you start to change your life around and say, okay, let me inculcate the things that bring me satisfaction and joy and peace in life, and bring them more and more into my day-to-day life.
Yes.
I did that, but then and it brings you certain happiness. You're not at a 10 on 10 on a day-to-day basis, but
Mhm.
you're at a, good 6 7. You're satisfied with your life, you and all. But what do you do when, as you use the word, reality hits, or when shit hits the fan?
Yeah.
Your partner gets sick, and now the circumstances in your life are not in your control. So do you at that time just do you abandon everything, and how do you let go of everything that you strive so hard to bring into your life, when things are not in your control? How do you then, in those times, love yourself or accept yourself? Because in those times it's fairly challenging to say, oh, this is how life is, and this is it, and
Yes.
I'm just going to be hopeless, and let me now try and find another way, because you did try that, and it
Yes.
well, yeah, and the reality hits. So.
Okay. So let me go now to the practical level, or to
Mm-hmm.
describe some exercises. I would divide the different categories that we can apply here into to the times. So there is a future-oriented approach that I can take. There is a
Mm-hmm.
present-oriented approach that I can take, and there's a past-oriented approach that I can take. The question of what
Okay.
the right approach is of course individual.
Right.
I can make it clear by, let's start with the past-oriented approach. I might stumble upon a certain problem that I have, namely that I don't grant myself, I don't allow myself certain things. I know I would like that. I know I would like to take some time off. I know I would like to talk about certain things, but I'm too ashamed. I was not raised in this way. Or maybe I did it in the past and people reacted very negatively. And from then on, I have some sort of a complex. I have some sort of a structural hesitation to do that. But I know it would be good for me. So something in the past is holding me back. I learned a certain attitude, a certain behavior in the past that is not doing me good.
Mm-hmm.
Is the example more or less clear?
Not really, right? For example, like taking my particular case or an example,
Yes.
um, I my belief was, okay, I do need to just understand why am I feeling all this upsetness and all of that. This past oriented example about figuring out what worked or what didn't work for me, it didn't really work in my scenario.
Okay,
Like, can
but
you? Yeah.
again, so it's not, I'm not talking about you. There are
Yeah.
certain people who when they look at it, they obviously are held back by something they have acquired, right? So that, for example, there's a woman in a relationship and she's unsatisfied with how the communication is with her husband because she has learned from the parents and from her early years in relationships that she's not supposed to speak up, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, she might pursue all the travels and all that, but this thing is holding her back because she knows she would like to be more an equal partner, and times have changed, but she has not gone through this process of really allowing herself that. She's still too afraid of the consequences, because the consequences in the past were, when she was raised, that the parents basically signaled her, you're not a good girl if you speak up. This is only something that
Mm-hmm.
boys do. And from her first relationships or failed relationships, that partners complained, it's like, no, you're too outspoken, you're too
Mm-hmm.
frank, you're too blunt, and so on. And then she was left, which can be quite traumatic, and from which I can learn the message, okay, I'd rather shut up if I want to be with someone.
Right.
Now, intellectually, I can understand that it's different now, right? Or that I'm old enough, or that
Mm-hmm.
my current relationship is different than my previous ones, but there's still this learned experience of pain, which makes me hesitant to raise my voice, to express something that is important to me. So in this case, with these kinds of people, where there's such a clear complex that is rooted in the past, it might not be fully satisfactory to learn a new language, which I also like, to travel, which I also like, to get a certain car, which I also like, and so on, right? Because there's this
Mm-hmm.
thing that's holding me back. And
Mm-hmm.
in the context of self-love, I would need to allow myself these things that I have not granting myself in the past, because that will make me full, and not giving me that, not allowing myself that, holds me back. So in this sense, when for these kinds of people, they have to learn to allow themselves, or another category, to forgive myself for something in the past that I did, and if that is holding me back. So I did this one bad thing, maybe I cheated on my partner or something like that, and from then on, I have not forgiven myself, and I think that I'm a bad person. Right? So here we have a clearer contrast between what I think about myself, and that it's obviously standing in the way of self-love. Because if I think I'm a bad person because I did a certain thing, I cannot love myself fully. So in this past-oriented aspect, I have to learn to forgive myself, and rather turn it into an action of the present. Right? So if I don't want to do, or if I judge myself for having cheated, for example, in the past, what is the equivalent action that I can take now? For example, I can talk to my partner if I have not done it already, or if it's better due to circumstances not to bring it up explicitly, I can go through a process to understand, okay, but then at least let me compensate by becoming really good in communication, by becoming really good in as a loving partner, or something that is an activity that compensates for what I've done, rather than the thought and the attitude of I'm not a good person, which just keeps me stuck. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't change. It becomes a rigid, stale, moldy kind of thought that is just rotting inside of me. Right? Okay. So this is only for certain people who definitely have something in the past that is holding them back, and where I would say that an approach of self-love and self-care would need to have to resolve these things, because they keep so much energy. They just invite self-judgment. Is that so far clear for this past-oriented approach, or for the people to whom this applies?
Yeah, and yes, I think yes, but the question is, I was thinking about, the woman, me being a woman, right? Like, and I grew up in that, oh, don't speak up. And I don't think I have that problem anymore in life.
No.
But to a degree, right? But that equal partner, that wanting to be that equal partner, and let me not speak up, because if I speak up, then there's going to be, if I really tell what I want to do or what I feel like doing, this will, create drama, and then I'm not, then I'm not being a good partner, etc.
Yes.
You come to the, first of all, I think, like, it's definitely tough for a lot of us to just even get there. But even when we get there, the next time there's an opportunity to speak up, it is still very tough to, like you said, right? It's still very tough to do it, right? It's tough to speak up in those moments, because now you have 30 years or 20 years of practice on not speaking up.
Right.
And there is to me, that definitely is an act of self-love to speak up in those moments. But it's something that, if you've never done, would be a big challenge for that particular person or that particular woman, right?
Totally, yes. So your question is how? How to do that? Right.
How should they do it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Well, over the years, psychologists have developed exercises for these kinds of things, not about this context, but in other contexts where we carry around burdens from the past. And one of the themes here is, for example, the inner child, right? And there are two themes there. One is to nourish the inner child. And there are some imagination exercises that we can do, that we, in a relaxed state of mind, we evoke this inner child in us. We let it speak. We can do this also. There's something like a chair technique, from Gestalt therapy, where if it's a therapeutic setting, right, we place a chair next to us, and then the chair where we sit is the adult us, and then if we move chairs, then this is the kind of the teenage us, or the younger us, the inner child us. The important thing is we'll let it speak.
Right.
And then it would say, it's not, I'm too ashamed. It's not right to speak up. My parents don't love me if I speak up. Maybe I should stay quiet. So it would basically represent the mindset of the intimidated child in our example. And what we do then is we nourish that position. The adult us takes this inner child us by the hand and comforts it and lets it partake in what we have learned over the years. We let the inner child get a glimpse of how it matures into a woman and what it learns on its way, and how it's okay to speak up, the positive experiences that we have, and so on. So very similar to if we have a dear nephew or a dear grandchild, or, you know, depending on how old you are, and we would love to spare them some of the pains that we went through, right? And then we tell them of our experiences, and then we see the niece and how already she shows signs of intimidation. Maybe she's 12 and gets into puberty and so on. And then we take her by the hand and take a walk and are sensitive to her issues. And then we tell her of our story, how we developed, right? And we share. So in a very similar fashion, we take our inner child as someone that we care about and we're sensitive towards, and we give them a glimpse of our life. We share it. Of course, this is only symbolic, right?
Yeah.
The working principle is here is integration. Because as adults, we actually hate this part of ourselves, right? The confident woman that you are, that has no problem to speak up and solve issues, you must hate this part of you that is easily intimidated, that is, when you look back on a situation, like, why didn't I say anything? This is stupid, I should know better, and so on. So what we intuitively do, we create a split between the parts that we appreciate about ourselves and the part that reminds us of a past that is not very glorious. And to take this inner child by the hand is a process of reintegration. We basically understand where the child is coming from. We understand why she is displaying those problematic behaviors and attitude that she has, right? And with this understanding, there is this empathy and this love towards her. If there was a niece, again, we would, you know, if it's a beloved niece, we would shower her with our love and sympathy, right? And if we do it in a similar way with this inner child, then we do a lot of internal integration. So this part that we have learned to separate ourselves from and create an internal distance, which then allows this to live on as a separate entity within us, we reintegrate it.
Okay.
Through this integration, we allow this inner child to mature. And this is the second aspect of this work with the inner child. At some point, we have to let it go again. Or to put it more dramatically, the inner child has to die. Right? Because we have nourished it, we have let it mature, we have shared our experience, it has grown with us, basically, and fast forward internally. And then we cannot hold on to this. There's, in the end, there's nothing, you know, melancholic or sweet about having this inner child, because it represents a part of us that has not matured. We can learn from it, we can mature through this contact with it, but in the end, we integrate it. And when it's integrated, we don't want it to live on as a separate entity within us. And then it's time to say goodbye, to disappear, to die, whatever metaphor you want to choose. Right? And there are a few technical aspects. This can be done with a therapist. This can be done with us writing down the position of this inner child. This can be done in a symbolic journey where we imagine to, we evoke this inner child as a symbol in a daydream-like state of mind, and we literally take it by the hand and we talk and so on. So depending on the approach that one has a tendency towards, we can do these things. But the principle is basically the same.
That makes sense. Okay.
Does that make sense on a technical exercise kind of level?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But coming back to the topic of the original question was like, how do you sort of love yourself in those moments when, things are totally not going your way?
Right. Okay. This was part of the answer, which is it might be
this is
for
the
some
past
people.
oriented.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there are the present and the future oriented. The future oriented would be basically about needs. And those kinds of life events, they might recalibrate or activate different sets of needs that we have. So when things are fine, I don't think much about my health, right? I think about enjoying myself, travel, pursue the sports and hobbies, and so on. Of course, there's underlying the existential fear of dying and of harm and of pain. So this is always there, right? But when there is no real occasion, there's also no specific need to keep that up. Some people do it, they have a good life, and they visit meditation classes, for example, where people do death contemplation and so on. But that's not really necessary for most people. Okay, now there's a life event that reminds me of mortality and impermanence and so on, which then activates out of this infinite pool of needs and desires of the unconscious. It activates these aspects, the aspects that remind me that my life is bound to end at some point. It might bring this event horizon of the demise a little bit closer to us. And then this creates naturally a shift, a recalibration that makes me perceive life differently, my own life, my partner's life, life in general. And then I have to reassess what my needs are. It will certainly move away, or it might move away from the fun-oriented hedonistic life. It might make me more contemplative. Or it does the opposite. Sometimes it hits people who have been very controlling and very self-denying for their life, thinking just about career and so on. And then a life event happens that reminds them that life is very short. Actually, then they throw off the shackles of the prison that they have put themselves into and realize, what am I doing here? Why am I preparing for a career that I might have in 25 years and sacrificing all my joys and relationships to that? So it might do the opposite for them. It's again very individual, but it does something with us. And my responsibility then is, again, not to hold on to what I've done in the past, but to do a reassessment of what is important to us. A little bit more technically, we can take a few sheets of paper and we can start brainstorming about what are the most important things in my life right now. Then I would suggest to basically reverse engineer what the underlying fundamental need is, right? So traveling is important to me, but traveling is not a fundamental need. Traveling is connected to independence, it's connected to freedom, it's connected to joy, it's connected to all these things. And for some people, it's more specific than that. So this is the theme: independence, freedom, excitement, adventure. These might be the themes, right? So I'm not clinging to the traveling as such. I just realized by an exercise like this of what is the underlying fundamental need that is important for me and that I used traveling for in order to satisfy it. Now I take my current life into consideration. I ask myself, is it that important for me now? So for example, I find out that I have some serious health issue, right? So I can ask myself, okay, and in the past that gave me a lot of satisfaction because of all these things: novelty, curiosity, adventure. Is that still important for me? Maybe yes, Certainly, it would be risky to travel. I
Yeah.
would need to have doctors around and so on. So if it's still important, for that, I have to look inside myself, right? If I'm still yearning for that. And then I can ask myself, what can I do here in the place that I live, under the circumstance that I have? Maybe I cannot move really well. Maybe I'm down to a wheelchair and so on. What can I do now that satisfies the needs of novelty, curiosity, adventure, freedom, independence, all these things that traveling stood for when people could travel? And then I find a replacement that works. There's always something. Might not be the perfect replacement, but I respect my need. Or in other words, I deliberately continue to have a connection with my unconscious. The need is an expression of the unconscious of what it wants me to do in order to be satisfied. And by respecting this need, I continue to tell my unconscious, look, my connection to you is still important to me. I will find ways to satisfy your desires, your needs.
Okay.
Right? And there's just one example. What we do on those sheets of paper is we collect the themes that are important to me. We might represent a big cloud of something that is not fulfilled yet, but I also have no big idea about. That also gets a place. And then when I have worked through the topics that I know about, again, I want a fast car. What does it stand for? I work reverse engineer basically what the fundamental need is. So I do this with all these items. I see if there are patterns, how much are object related, how much are relationship connected. Relationship connected means family, intimate relationship, friendships, colleagues, and so on. I see the patterns there and how I can satisfy these things. And then I deal with what is left, the unknown, the thing that even if I take care of all these things that I'm aware of, I know I would not be satisfied because this new thing is there. Right. And that I can work on in different ways. Now, this is I introduced it as a future-oriented thing because ultimately, in order to take care of myself in the future, I start now, step by step.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, this last aspect comes very close to the present, the thing that I don't know about, because now I have to evoke my inner energies. And I can go into basically a mode of vitality and sensuality, which are two expressions of the unconscious that manifest themselves in the present. Two aspects that are notably absent when we are in a depressed state of mind. Then we are less sensual, we are less vital.
Yeah.
Right.
But how do you invoke them?
I'm sorry, how do I?
How do you invoke them, like especially when you're going through a rough period of in life, right?
Yes. Basically, I need to connect with what is there. Now, this is very vague and it really depends on people. For some people, the body is an important part. Which means, for example, if I feel an emptiness, a lack of some sort, I can start with asking myself, where do I perceive this in the body? It might be in the chest. It might be a vacuum in the chest or something. And then what I do again is I integrate, I connect with that. So I allow myself to feel that in spite of it being very unpleasant. And then I can ask myself further questions. How big it is? Does it have a certain color? Does it have a certain motion? Is it spiraling? Is it static? Is it empty? Is it filled with some sort of fog or something? So I use my imagination. I throw things at the unconscious, which doesn't want to intuitively let me know what it is. I throw some categories at it so that something sticks. And then I realize, yeah, it's rather dark than light. It's rather foggy than clear, for example, right? It can be anything. It's rather a dark blue than a yellow.
Right.
It's rather about me than about an us. About me as a person, not about relationships. I can again use techniques that I used for the inner child to externalize it. I can put the chair there, right? And when I switch positions and I sit on the chair, I channel, so to speak, this inner void and I let it speak.
Right.
Or I use associative writing. Or I take a long walk and contemplate this thing that, so I'm basically preparing my unconscious. Okay, I'm taking half an hour. I want to get to know you. I'm interested in that, right? So whatever it is that keeps me, that you unconscious thinks is too frightening or discomforting, no, I'm really interested in that. So I convince my unconscious to let me know a little bit. Now, we don't expect something very precise to come up. What we expect as a result of this is a readiness to piece by piece get a glimpse of it, which will manifest probably not in these contemplative situations. This is where we're fishing. This is where we're throwing things at this fog or emptiness, for example. It will manifest in conversations with others where we're not thinking about it. So we talk, we meet a friend, we talk about life, and then I hear myself talking in a way that surprises me a little bit. Or I catch something from what my friend says that is basically just a repetition of what they're complaining about the relationship or something, what they always do when we meet, but now suddenly I hear a certain different aspect in that.
Right, like a thread in there, and that you're like, oh, okay. There's aha moments, right?
Yes,
So,
and this is more likely the result of the unconscious connecting with that, but still it's very helpful to do those artificial exercises or do a meditation about that. Again, without the expectation that I will get a clear result, but rather as a gesture of goodwill to the unconscious that I'm ready for that.
okay. So that's sort of like more of very much a meditation or sitting with yourself and writing and
Yes.
connecting with yourself.
Yes. And
Okay.
plus to now so the future-oriented approach would be basically the need-based approach, right? So I cultivate, I become aware of my needs, and then I actualize them. I would like to live in my own apartment. This needs money. This needs preparation, research, and so on. But eventually, I'm so well connected that I know I would feel happy. I don't want to live in my parents' basement anymore. I don't want to live in a rental place. It's a symbolic thing. I want to live in my own space, maybe in a forest, maybe in a city, whatever it is. So that needs
Right.
time and planning for execution. So in that sense, it's a future-oriented approach. Coming back to the present, this vitality thing is the most important one. Not only to, there was just one example of researching sort of a new thing that is not actualized yet. It's an emptiness, a foggy, a vagueness there. But in general, I can tell myself, I can prepare myself to experience what is happening around me in a more direct, sensual, intuitive, emotional way. I want to get close to that. I don't want to be just intellectual about it. I don't want to be just conceptual about it. So next time when I talk to my grandma, who I heard is sick and so on, I want to be empathetic, not just towards her, and I want to have a deep connection, to use that time not just with her, but also with myself. I let it get to me. This is what I mean with sensuality or vitality, right? And often it manifests somehow in the body. Often it's, somewhere in the heart region, the chest region, where we often locate those kinds of feelings of being touched. Right? It doesn't have to be that. It's different for people, but I basically allow myself to feel it.
Okay.
And this is how I care for myself, in the sense that I allow myself to have a rich, intense experience of the present. So not so much on the joy and happiness, because the example of the sick grandma doesn't fit that, but more in the direction of richness and fullness.
Okay. Okay. That that makes sense. Okay. Now, coming back to that future-based self, um, figuring out what my needs are.
Yes.
Now, my question is like most of us, right? Like, how do you know what needs do you have are true, and what are the needs that I think I will be happy when I get them, right? So,
Yeah.
um, taking the example of the kid who, well, we won't take the example of the kid who's staying in the basement and wants to move out. I think he will be happy. But how do you know that the needs that you have are the ones that um, are ones that the society tells you are your needs, or are genuinely things that you care about, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, how do you identify what's there and what's not there? Because otherwise, what my fear is, right? Like, you end up saying, oh, you know what? I think like ha having this much money or having a job will make me happy. And then you get the job, and then of course it won't make you happy. Or um, like, how do you know that the needs that you are, other than just experimenting with them,
Mm.
which kind of are very much, they have a long tail. If somebody's is unemployed, they're looking for a job, or have
Yeah.
not held a job before, it will take them a while. So how do you figure that out?
Yes.
Like, what are your true
Uh,
needs, right?
it's not easy, and the frustrating
Hmm.
truth is that we might always be wrong. It depends, because we're playing catch up.
Yeah.
The unconscious doesn't let us know in concrete terms, because this is not its job, and it doesn't have, it's pretty much in us. It doesn't have a clue about the world and what to do about that. It just tells us, I want that. I
So
want,
basically, we're just like pursuing happiness our entire lives. Like, is
yes.
that what it is?
Yes, and if we're good at that, if we develop a good connection with our unconscious, there can be some sort of, as a result, some sort of a life that feels like surfing. That there is an
Hmm.
easiness to it, that we move from place to place, but it comes at ease. And it's not that I'm stuck, and then I have to break
Hmm.
through a door, and then I'm in the other room, and then the next door is even heavier than that, and I have to bring up some heavier arms and so on. But that there's flowing easiness to it. So this is the result of me having established a good rapport, a good connection to my unconscious. But realistically, how many people have that? Not many.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, most of us, the reason why we end up being on that self-development, self-growth journey is
Yes.
because we realize a fundamental thing that, okay, we do need to, like, we're just sort of like catching up with our beliefs, and we're pursuing happiness, but it just feels like a never-ending process, right? Like,
Yeah, it
it's
is.
tiring, it's exhausting.
Okay, but this is not necessarily the case. It is a never-ending journey, as life is, until it ends. But it doesn't have to be heavy. That's what I mean, right? For people who have figured it out, it's not heavy. It's not painful. It's not exhausting, and so on. It's just it's just what happens. It's just life. You had a job for 2 years, and then you think maybe it's better to have another job.
Hmm.
Um,
Rather than beating yourself up and saying, oh, well, you didn't, you know,
yes, or being in
you have
doubt.
to always find
Should
another
I leave
job.
the job or should I not? Then that speaks for that. That speaks against it. Then I'm in perpetual doubt, and that is painful. But rather just to see that something is over. Okay, like I learned what I need to learn. I earned what I wanted to earn from this job, and time to move on. That's it.
But then, like, if I when I know people like those who will switch jobs just because, or will actually even switch marriages, right? Like, one
Yes.
of my colleagues, she's on, I don't know, I think like her fifth marriage, right? So,
Hmm.
um, uh, and it's every 5 years she changes her husband, because like then she's just doing what you said, right? Like, she's just being like, okay, well, this one didn't work out, let me try another one. Like, uh,
Yes,
there
but the
is,
important level, of course, is the report with the unconscious, right? So
yeah.
it must come along with certain satisfaction there. Now, what am I to do if I don't have this? I have to
Mm-hmm.
put work into it. There's no other way around it. There's no magic trick and there's no hack. So part of the work that I can do is, for example, to reverse engineer the more fundamental needs.
Mm-hmm.
The advantage in that would be that I can be a little bit more sophisticated with my experimentation. So traveling gives me joy. Do I
Yeah.
know that it brings me joy because it distracts me from my problems, or because it connects me with myself and with nature? I don't know. It can be both. I'm not kind of smart enough to see behind
It's
the facade. I just see that it brings me joy. So
mm-hmm.
when I do, for example, this reverse engineering, and I ask myself, okay, what is the deeper theme that is connected for me individually, specifically with traveling? What does it bring me? And then I need to intuit. There's no other way. And then I might come to a theme of, well, it makes me curious. It brings me into a state of curiosity. Maybe this is my
Mm-hmm.
conclusion. Now, instead of having to book my next flight to the Caribbean or to Thailand or whatever in order to test
Mm-hmm.
that, I can basically understand, well, if it's the thing of curiosity, it should be activated by any kind of curiosity, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
bring myself into a state of going to a neighborhood in my city that I have not been in, and to look at this world, in a very similar way as I've been automatically doing when I travel abroad. Because if it's the curiosity thing, I should be able to access that through different means as well. Or I go to a party and there are people that I don't know. Can I talk
Mm-hmm.
to them with a curious mindset? Will I find satisfaction in that? So it allows me a broader scope of experimentation, after which I can learn a little bit more about myself and realize, okay, so I went to this party, there were people I didn't know. I tried to approach them with curiosity and asking the question and being open-minded, and it was just boring.
Yeah.
So what does it mean? My vague hypothesis that the traveling is good for me um, because of curiosity.
Because I meet interesting people or curiosity. Yeah.
Yes. So I have to change that. I have to adjust that, and so on. So this is a kind of work that I need to put into. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the reverse engineering of needs is just one example, but I have to put some work into it in order to find out. The principle is, again, to play catch up, but it can be a little bit more sophisticated about that.
Okay. Okay. This was really helpful. I think it answers quite a few questions. So,
Okay.
I think like sort of to me, it just comes down to like, sitting down, figuring out what your needs are, um, experimenting with what, like even in those, even in the life's trying circumstances, you can't up and quit your job, you can't up and
Mhm.
change your life immediately. Even in those moments, learning to connect with your own subconscious and trying to figure out what are the things that do bring you joy, and trying and experimenting there is
Yes.
sort of the way to go.
Yes.
Okay.
And it might be necessary. I mean, you spoke more from your direction, but it might be necessary to integrate a little bit from the past-oriented approach, because maybe my field of experimentation in the future-oriented approach is
Mm-hmm.
limited, but what I allow myself to do, which would be an aspect of the past, right? I've never allowed myself to do these things. I've never allowed myself to act or communicate in a certain way, and then that limits my sense of experimentation. If I have the kind of the stigma or the program in my head, I as a man or I as a woman, I don't chat up the other gender, right? Because in the past I was punished for that. That might
Mm-hmm.
seriously limit my range of possibilities when I do go to this party and want to check how much I am curiosity driven, right?
Right.
So these things I find out, I have to be curious about how I block myself without knowing that. And that I can be, or this is something that I can do by observing myself. And it's probably easier by doing this when I talk to someone and open up and they see my quirks and how
Mm-hmm.
I'm twisted and warped. in my mind, or when I observe others. So I go to the party, I see how others behave. How do other women behave? How do other men behave? And I'm like, could I do that? And then I think like, no, that's not for me. And then I can ask myself, why actually? Why am I not allowing myself to do that? Because it's what? Not my dignity, not my style? Or is there something behind that that is kind of more subtle, that I'm not looking at? And then I go into experimentation mode. Let me just act for one day like this.
Okay.
Or one evening, right? And in order to check if there's
Mm-hmm.
something more substantial that I'm not allowing myself to do.
Okay. I see. So sort of like, my tendency is always to be a little bit more future-based, is to also try like, the past-based, the past-based structure, or somebody who's
Yes.
a lot more past-based, like try future-based a little bit,
Yes.
and sort of experiment with both those sides. So.
Right. And the theme that and is also actually part of the past
Mm-hmm.
thing, is self-criticism, right? This is rooted in the past.
Yeah.
This is nothing that spontaneously occurs. No, there's a pattern that comes up
Mm-hmm.
again and again and again in a very specific way, which shows that
Mm-hmm.
it's rooted in the past. So this is something that I have to tackle, right?
Right.
Not necessarily that I have to, it's more kind of sensible that I would approach this with a past-oriented approach, but
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily. Sometimes I don't have to fully analyze kind of the past. I just have to become aware of the things where I self-criticize myself, and then
Mm-hmm.
just do them in a more present-oriented approach, where I go through the vitality of it. I allow myself to feel these things without judging. So I tap into the energy of that, right? But I don't
Mm-hmm.
activate the judgment aspect of that. So as you see, I
Yeah.
started with a clear-cut distinction between past, present, and future. Of course, this is just a concept to make it a little bit more tangible. And in the end, these are all very much intertwined, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless,
Yeah.
as I described, they have different kind of practices. They have different kind of techniques or exercises. So it does make sense to distinguish between them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it definitely helps to sort of have that kind of structure and try out these different things that you laid out. So this was very interesting. Thank you, Doc.
Okay, thank you.